It was supposed to be a simple family dinner, but the silverware hadn't even clinked before the judgment began. At the head of the table, my cousin Chloe raised her glass and casually announced she'd landed an interview with Rainford and Locke, one of the most prestigious financial firms in the Pacific Northwest. The room erupted in praise. You'd think she'd already made partner. Then all eyes turned to me. "So, Amy?" My aunt smiled tight and patronizing. "What is it you do again, dear?" I replied calmly, "I run a private equity firm." The table went silent for a beat. Then came the laughter. "You mean that online thing?" Chloe giggled. My uncle added, "You're not getting any younger, Amy. Time to think about something stable." They didn't know. Not yet. They didn't know that the skyscraper they admired from across the water bore my name. They didn't know the 9-figure acquisition I'd just signed, or that Rainford and Locke wasn't just a firm I was familiar with, it was mine. I'd acquired it quietly 5 years ago. As they toasted Chloe's upcoming interview, they had no idea she'd be walking into my boardroom, handing me her resume. The same cousin who once mocked my freelance phase would be calling me ma'am by 9 a.m. They saw me as a failure that night. Tomorrow they'd learn exactly who I am. At that family dinner, I was the invisible one. While everyone clapped for my cousin Chloe and her imminent interview at Rainford and Locke, I quietly sipped my iced tea and listened to the familiar hum of self-congratulations. Chloe's achievements were always treated like the second coming of sliced bread top schools, internships arranged by family friends, glowing praise for every carefully curated step of her career. When she announced the CEO himself requested her interview, the table lit up with excitement. My aunt beamed. My uncle looked smug. No one thought to ask what I was up to these days. "Amy's still doing that little online thing," my aunt said with a dismissive wave, laughing into her wine glass. But I wasn't doing a little online thing. I owned the thing. I had founded a private equity firm at 30, quietly acquiring and transforming distressed companies into industry leaders. One of those companies, 5 years ago, was Rainford and Locke, the very firm my cousin had applied to. I had restructured it, expanded it, and moved it into a new headquarters, complete with my name on the top floor suite. Chloe's resume had landed on my desk 2 weeks earlier. Our HR flagged it with a note legacy referral. "Looks good on paper. Final call is yours, Miss Carlyle." At that dinner, Chloe told me, smirking, that maybe I should swing by the firm someday. "It's a real company," she said. "You'd be amazed." I simply smiled and wished her luck. The next morning, Chloe arrived early for her interview. My assistant Priya updated me with amusement. She's in the lobby ordering oat milk lattes and name-dropping half the board. Hasn't looked up once at the press wall featuring your Forbes cover. At exactly 9:00 a.m., I asked Priya to send her in. When Chloe walked into my office and saw me behind the CEO desk, her face fell. "Amy," she gasped, "what are you doing here?" I turned my nameplate toward her. "I'm the CEO," I said. "Let's talk about your application." She stammered. She tried to recover. She flailed in front of the very person she had laughed at the night before. I reviewed her resume with professional detachment. It was impressive at a glance, but I had already done my research. Inflated numbers, plagiarized reports. She had once taken credit for a campaign my firm had launched through a subsidiary. When my aunt and uncle arrived, demanding to see me, I welcomed them in. They looked at me like I'd grown 2 heads. "What are you doing in the CEO's office?" my aunt whispered. "I was just finishing Chloe's interview," I said, motioning for them to take a seat. I showed them the screen behind me. Company milestones, media features, and growth stats under my leadership. The headlines said it all. The quiet queen of capital, the woman behind the turnaround. Chloe was visibly shaken. My aunt and uncle turned pale. Then I made my decision. Chloe's application is rejected, I said, and your behavior toward me all these years, it stops today. They tried to argue, pleaded for understanding, called it family, but they had never treated me like family. They treated me like the placeholder while Chloe shined. They saw me as a nobody, but I had quietly become the one they'd all one day work for, and now that day had come. They used to call me directionless. Every holiday, every birthday dinner, someone would ask what I was really doing with my life, usually followed by my cousin Chloe, charming the table with her carefully scripted career milestones. She was always the shining star, Ivy League fast-tracked promotions, and now, as she proudly announced, one family dinner, a personal invitation to interview with Rainford and Locke, the most prestigious financial firm in the region. The room practically sparkled with their pride. My uncle paused mid-carve of the turkey. My aunt nearly cried. I stayed silent, slicing my chicken with steady hands. I knew what was coming next. "What is it you do again, Amy?" My aunt asked sweetly, the question laced with condescension. "I run a private equity firm," I replied simply. A few giggles fluttered around the table. "Oh, your little online thing," Chloe said with a dismissive smirk. They had no idea. 13 years ago, while Chloe was coasting on connections, I was working 16-hour days, turning around, failing companies, building systems, reinvesting profits into distressed assets. One of those companies 5 years ago was Rainford and Locke. I had quietly acquired a controlling interest and led its full-scale transformation. It was now my firm. I had changed my last name, stayed under the radar, and let the world assume I was just freelancing while reshaping a major player in the finance world. I wasn't hiding, I was building. 2 weeks before that family dinner, Chloe's resume had landed on my desk. HR had forwarded it with a comment, "Confident candidate, legacy referral. Final say is yours, Ms. Carlisle." I knew I'd see her name again. I just didn't expect it to be this perfect. Chloe had no idea her personal invite to interview came from me. So when I walked out of that dinner and returned to my Queen Anne townhouse, another thing they assumed I was renting, I laughed softly to myself. Tomorrow was going to be illuminating. At 9:00 a.m., sharp Chloe was ushered into my office. Her heels clicked confidently until she saw me seated behind the CEO desk. She froze. "Amy," she gasped. I smiled calmly. "Good morning, Chloe. Please have a seat. You work here. I own this firm." She blinked, trying to recover. "There's been a mistake. I'm supposed to meet with the CEO." I turned my nameplate toward her. Her confidence evaporated. "I reviewed your application." I continued. "I have some questions about the metrics you listed under your last campaign. Our research shows those results came from your junior team, one you initially pushed to fire." Her cheeks flushed. She tried to explain, but I didn't need explanations. I already had the facts. What I wanted was accountability. Then my assistant entered. "Amy, your aunt and uncle are here. They insist on speaking with you." "Of course they are," I said, still composed. "Send them in." They stormed in like they owned the place until they saw me behind the desk, until they saw the press clippings on the wall, Forbes, Fast Company, Bloomberg, all with my name. This is yours," my uncle stammered. "It always has been," I replied. They looked stunned. My aunt sat down slowly, eyes wide. "Why didn't you tell us I did?" I said softly. "You just never listened," Chloe whispered. "If we'd known, you'd have treated me differently." I cut in. "That's the problem." I rejected Chloe's application on the spot. Politely, professionally, but with finality. She would no longer be rewarded for charm and shortcuts. And as they left my office quiet for once, I finally felt at peace. Not because I'd humiliated them, but because I'd reclaimed my voice, my worth. And the story they had written about me was no longer mine. I had written my own. They called it tough love. I called it betrayal. For most of my life, I was the dependable one, the fixer, the helper, the one who always showed up when the rest of the family fell short. So when I paid for the entire Thanksgiving meal, turkey pies, sides, from the local boutique bakery, I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd finally earned a seat at the table. Instead, I got an email from my cousin 2 days before. Wait, I thought you weren't coming. Your parents told everyone you weren't invited this year. My name is Debbie Crawford, and at 38, I learned that loyalty without boundaries is just another word for being used. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even respond. I just made 2 calls, one to the butcher and one to the bakery. Since everything was ordered under my name, refunds were fast and painless. And then I waited. Thanksgiving Day, 17 p.m. My dad called, panicked. The food never came. I could hear the confusion in the background, the empty plates, the tense whispers, my mother's clipped voice trying to salvage appearances. I took a sip of cider and calmly said, maybe check with whoever placed the order. Silence. For years, I'd been the scapegoat, the one they blamed when things got tense, the one they excluded when I started saying no to unreasonable demands. Now they were sitting in a house full of people with no food and no clue how to fix it. 3 days later, my mom texted, "We really missed you. Hope we can move past this." Not sorry, just move past it. Then came the spin. I was unstable. I had sabotaged Thanksgiving. I was too emotional, too dramatic, too much. So I brought someone unexpected to Christmas dinner, my grandmother. She and my mother hadn't spoken in over a decade, and my mom had worked hard to keep it that way. But Grandma was still sharp, still full of warmth, and more importantly, she remembered. She remembered how many times I had been brushed aside. The moment we stepped through the door, my mother's face went pale. The dinner table was full again, but this time it wasn't just about the food. It was about showing up for myself. Grandma sat at that table like a queen, commenting on the store-bought stuffing with a twinkle in her eye. Tastes very consistent. I nearly choked on my cranberry juice, trying not to laugh. But of course, my mother wasn't done. Weeks later, she started telling people I had a breakdown, that I needed space, that I was mentally unstable. A tidy little lie to clean up the mess she'd made. But this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't beg to be understood. I typed a message in the family group chat. "Hi, everyone. Just wanted to clear up some confusion. No, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm doing well. I've simply decided I'm not available for dysfunction anymore. Wishing you all a peaceful new year." Then I hit send, and something surprising happened. My brother texted me. "Can we talk?" We hadn't spoken in months, but he called and he said it. "I don't agree with what Mom did." And I should have said something. That moment, just that sliver of truth, meant more to me than years of forced politeness. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need a dramatic confrontation. What I needed was peace, and I finally had it. Here's what I've learned. Family isn't about blood. It's about respect. And if someone can't offer you that, even during the holidays, then maybe the best gift you can give yourself is distance. Because sometimes the empty chair at the table isn't your punishment. It's your freedom. They said I was too focused on results. Well, they were absolutely right. I spent 6 years at Axis Dynamics, quietly becoming the backbone of their operations, streamlining systems, landing major contracts, and cutting costs in ways that padded every department's budget. But when the promotion I'd earned was handed to my loud-laughing, underperforming coworker because she was more fun in meetings, I realized something. Competence alone wasn't enough. My name is Natalie James, and this is the story of how I stopped waiting to be recognized and started making moves that made recognition inevitable. When my boss, Carl Henderson, smiled that smug corporate smile and said, "Brianna just lights up the room," I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I just reached into my bag, pulled out my resignation letter, and handed it to him with the kind of calm that rattled him more than any outburst ever could. What Carl didn't know was that I wasn't walking away. I was walking towards something bigger. For the past 3 years, I'd been building a project management system in my spare time. It started as a way to make my own work more efficient, but it grew smart: automation, predictive analytics, real-time team optimization. It was the real reason our numbers soared, but no one bothered to ask how. And 6 months before that ridiculous promotion meeting, I'd quietly filed for a patent. 2 weeks after my resignation, I was sitting across from the CEO of our biggest competitor, Solstice Tech. He didn't want me on his payroll. He wanted me at the table, with equity, with control. The day I stepped into my new corner office at Solstice, I brought more than a patent. I brought proof that leadership isn't about who laughs the loudest, it's about who delivers. Meanwhile, back at Axis Dynamics, Brianna was drowning. Without my system quietly holding everything together, the cracks showed fast: client complaints, missed deadlines, budgets blown wide open. Within 3 months, they'd lost 30% of their business. Carl tried to call. Then he emailed. Finally, he sent a formal apology. "You were right," he wrote. "The system was yours. The success was yours. I just didn't see it in time. I read it, smiled, and filed it under too late. Now I run my own innovation division. The system I built, now known as OptiCore, is being licensed globally. Our client retention is at 98%, and we've reduced project turnaround times by more than half. But the biggest win, I no longer need permission to lead. I no longer need to fight for a seat at a table that never saw me coming. If you've ever been overlooked because you weren't the loudest voice in the room, if you've been told you're too serious, too quiet, or too focused, let me tell you, you're not too much. You're just too valuable to be ignored forever. Build what they didn't bother to notice. Then let them watch while you scale it beyond anything they imagined. Because sometimes the best response to being undervalued is becoming undeniable. They didn't just sell my house, they sold it to the wrong person." The message hit my phone while I was stepping out of a major business meeting in Berlin. I had just inked a $20 million partnership deal, poised to expand our reach across the European fintech landscape. That's when the email came through: "The house is sold." Just like that. No phone call, no warning, just a short message from my parents telling me that the house I had spent 5 years paying for renovating, maintaining, insuring had been sold, without my knowledge, without my consent. My name is Evelyn Shaw, and what my family didn't know was that I wasn't just their daughter working a small consulting gig out of Zurich. I was the CEO of Echelon Partners, one of Europe's fastest-growing corporate restructuring firms. And for the past 18 months, I had been quietly acquiring every piece of debt connected to their crumbling logistics company, Shaw & Co., through a web of shell companies. They didn't know it, but they had just sold my house to their new boss. See, when my father refused to put the deed in my name years ago, he said it was to protect the family's assets. When they needed me to cover payroll, I did. When they borrowed from my college fund to float operations, I didn't protest. I just built something better. Behind the scenes, my firm had been buying up their defaulted loans, unpaid supplier invoices, and overdue interest. Bit by bit, I took control. And when their board brought in a mysterious new consultancy to help right the ship, they had no clue it was my firm behind the scenes. So when I walked into their boardroom weeks later as the majority shareholder, their faces turned ghost white. "Evelyn," my father said, blinking. "What are you doing here?" I smiled. "Actually, I'm right on time." I laid the paperwork on the table. Ownership, control, authority. You see, they thought they could take everything I'd worked for and treat me like the black sheep. But I'd spent a decade learning to build power quietly. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to move smart, move fast, and move with purpose. As I relieved my brother of his title as COO and offered my parents either demotions or the door, they looked at me like I was a stranger. But I wasn't. I was the same daughter they overlooked, underestimated, and used. Only now I was the one with the pen, and they were signing papers I had written. And the house, that property they sold behind my back, I bought the development firm that purchased it. The deed was back in my name by the end of the week. They thought they were teaching me a lesson, but all they did was remind me why I stopped depending on their approval years ago. If you've ever been betrayed by the people who should have protected you, if you've worked in silence, been underestimated, and pushed aside, don't waste your energy proving your worth to people who can't see it. Build in silence. Move strategically. And when the time comes, let your results speak louder than your pain. Because the best kind of revenge, it isn't revenge at all. It's ownership. The clinking of silverware and the soft hum of family chatter at the Langston family dinner table had always carried the same tune praise for Belle and polite indifference for everyone else. When Belle announced her big interview at Rainier and Locke, the room erupted in admiration. Except for one quiet voice, Marlene Carter, the cousin no one ever really looked at twice. What Belle and the rest of the family didn't know was that the company she was so eager to join already had a CEO, and that CEO was Marlene. They didn't know about the years Marlene spent building her private equity firm, the takeovers, the restructuring, the strategic acquisition of Rainier and Locke itself. They didn't ask, never listened, never cared. At that dinner, they laughed at her like always, at her little consulting business and independent streak. But the next morning, Belle would walk into a glass-walled boardroom and come face to face with her invisible cousin, the woman behind the desk, the name on the door. In that moment, every dismissal, every belittling comment would dissolve into silence. Sometimes, the most powerful stories come not from loud voices, but from quiet resolve. As we grow older, it's easy to feel dismissed by family, by society, by people who think they already know who we are. But the truth is, your journey never expires. Your value doesn't fade with age. And your story might just be the one they never saw coming. Marlene's tale reminds us that it's never too late to rise with dignity, with patience, and with a purpose that can't be erased. Have you ever been underestimated or written off by someone who should have known better? Share your story in the comments. We want to hear your voice. And if this story touched your heart, hit that subscribe button. Because this space is for everyone who's still writing the best chapter of their life.